Hello, my friend. Welcome to day 2 of our Tiny Parks Painting the Wilderness Challenge. Today, we are venturing into the desert and painting a teeny tiny version of Saguaro National Park. One thing I want you to remember about this scene, and even for desert scenes in particular, is that while the desert may be characterized as barren, not so much life, the opposite is true. There's so much life and so much meaning to find in desert scenes. And in this particular scene, we are taking a look at how light and how sun affects all the different layers and subjects that we're trying to paint. So the sun is behind, like in front of us in this scene, and that means the light is like piercing through the silhouettes, and we're going to try to capture that using different colors, using different color values, and paying close attention to which layers go in the back and which layers go in the front. And as always, remember, you're a painter, not a camera, and you are allowed to create a painting. Let's jump right in by creating our tiny landscape in the sketchbook with some tape. The tape that I'm using this series is Holbein soft tape, but you can use washi tape, you can use masking tape, you can even cut your own tiny landscape if you would prefer to use a small piece of paper rather than just, taping off a small section of paper, whatever feels best for you. So now that I have sectioned off all of the tiny landscape with my tape, I'm going to paint the whole thing with clean water. And that's because I want to start with like a really soft layer for both the sky and the landscape. So soft meaning like luminous, meaning wet on wet technique. I'm using gold ochre for the sky. Gold ochre is one of my very favorite colors to use when I'm trying to paint like sun rays. Specifically because it has this really beautiful glow. And the most important thing when we're painting the sky here is we want the sky to take up about 2/3 and the landscape to take up about 1/3. And we want to keep the space on the right-hand side just above the landscape in the sky. We want that to be a little bit lighter because that's where the sun is going to be. So I'm painting like 2/3 gold ochre, 1/3 sap green, and then along the bottom, I'm adding a little bit darker value, so more paint, and maybe even a little bit of indigo to the sap green along the bottom, so it can be dark along the bottom and then gradually like lighter at the top. But as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that my green is seeping up into the sky. So I'm kind of painting some, because I'm trying to paint a really like watery, blendy underlayer here. So I want like the bottom of the landscape to be dark with some little spots of green and some little spots of yellow. But because the green is going too far, I'm going to take, while this is still wet, I'm going to take my towel and just mop up a bunch of the paint because I do still want 2/3 of the sky to be yellow. So I mopped up some of it, then I kept painting and to add back in a little bit more yellow. And I think that there was still just not enough. I wanted it to be 2/3, so I took my towel back and I mopped up some more so that I had just like a really straightforward, the bottom 1/3 of the scene is landscape, the top 2/3 is the sky. And then I left a little bit of white space on the right-hand side just above the landscape for where I want the sun to be. Then I wanted there, because in the reference photo you can kind of see just a little bit of blue in the sky, so I took some cerulean and painted the top of the sky, but it looked green, so I mopped up a little bit more of that so I could kind of paint on white paper and added a bit more of the cerulean there. This is all an experiment, remember? And with teeny tiny landscapes, I'm not trying to like finagle with it to make everything exactly perfect. I'm just adding in, making this a loose interpretation based on the colors that I see. So before I dry this, I took some more gold ochre and I tapped in some gold ochre just along the bottom landscape portion because I do know that I want some of the landscape to look like it's glowing. And so I'm adding in the gold ochre in the landscape portion just so I can set myself up for success there. Then I'm going to dry it, let it dry or dry it with a dryer. And then I'm going to mix a kind of a silhouette, like a violet kind of silhouette muted color. And that I mixed that by making like kind of a warm brown. So adding red to brown, making it kind of like a violet-ish brown. And what I'm trying to do is to create the mountain layer, but it has like a wash of color. So first we're going to start with the wet mountain layer, just with clean water. And then on the edges, so the edges close to the tape, you're going to have the brown. And then you're going to add in gold ochre while it's still wet, and then leave the area of the mountain just beneath the sun. Leave that with white space. This is going to be tricky. This is going to be tricky with a small paintbrush and a small landscape. You might have to mop up some of the paint and try again. You might have to use a smaller brush and try again. Remember, the more water is in your paint, the more the paint is going to go everywhere. And the most important thing here is not that the colors maintain, really. It's that you can tell that the area beneath the sun is lighter, and then it gradually goes yellow and then brown toward the tape. And then you can kind of blend in the bottom of the mountain to the landscape with a clean brush, just brushing right underneath it so it kind of, it's not quite the same stark line anymore. Also, most important thing with the mountain is we want it to be a light value. We need it to be very light, very watery. So even if it's only like hints of yellow and hints of brown, that's going to be plenty. Because in order to capture the light here, and we're painting, the cacti in kind of like the midground, right? But we're building up the values, meaning light, light, light in the dark, in the back, and then gradually getting darker. So now we're going to paint the cacti in the midground. Using the same kind of purpley, muted brown, like brown with a little bit of purple, brown with a little bit of red, we're going to paint some teeny tiny cacti in the midground. So in front of the mountain, but in the back of the landscape. The most important thing here is the closer to the edge, the more purple the cacti are going to look. The closer to the sun, so the cacti that are directly underneath the sun, the more orange they're going to look. In order to really make the light effect pop, we need to keep the gradient, which is a gradual shift from one color to another, even with all the separate layers. So by making the midground cacti just underneath the sun more orange, and then the cacti off to the side more violet, that is going to help make the light effect more effective. Next, we're going to paint the cactus that's right in front of the sun that has some of the sunlight piercing through it. Essentially, what we're doing is we're painting a cactus, and then we're going to add some yellow into the cactus and also lift some of the paint so that there's white space where the sun is shining through. That's why I started with just a watery version of the cactus. So I painted the cactus with water first. Then I added some yellow, some gold ochre, and then I added, this is like Payne's gray or indigo with some of that really dark violet color. We don't need this to be black. Like indigo with some red, indigo with some kind of violet color into it is going to be just fine. But we do want to start with watery so that the indigo doesn't take up the whole cactus. And so that when we add the indigo and the gold ochre and then lift some of it so the white space shines through all together, it's not in sections that are dried, it's sections that are blending into each other. So it looks more like the light space is radiating through, so that the sunlight is radiating through. And the way that you do that is with the wet on wet technique, or just by lifting the paint when it's still wet off of the cactus. You can do that with a paintbrush. So like a thirsty brush is a clean brush that has been blotted off on a towel, and then just like pushing down so that you lift some of the paint, or with a paper towel to lift some of that paint so that the white space shines through and it looks like sunlight. One thing to note is this is tricky. Starting with a wet cactus and then trying to lift the paint from it and keeping the gold around the edges of the white space and then dark along the very edges of the cactus, right? So it's like white space, gold, and then dark of the cactus. This is tricky detail work. So it's okay if you're really frustrated. It's also okay if you want to skip that step. It's really just fine. And then the last step before we go to these foreground cacti is just take a clean brush and brush down along the bottom of that other cactus that we drew so that the bottom of it blends into the landscape area. Next, we're going to paint the darkest cacti. So these are in the very foreground. And we're just, for all of these saguaros, we're not even doing we're not doing very fancy work, right? We're just like painting a very thin like stalk and then little arms coming out from it. And then with these, you can just paint them black or just indigo, just like a really dark Payne's gray. You can also add little strips of color along the outside to make it kind of look like they're glowing. It's okay to leave little pieces of white space as you're painting, to make it look like the sun is reflecting off of them. Either way, it doesn't really matter that much. You can still make them like a solid silhouette and it'll look just fine. Next, we're going to add some texture to the foreground. So I made a foliage brush by taking an old round number 2 that I wanted to ruin, right? And I like spread it around on my paper so that the bristles are all fanning out. And then I'm taking some indigo, taking some green, taking some gold ochre, and I'm just tapping along to create this foliage texture. And so this is a brush that I don't need anymore to be like that finely honed round detail brush. So that's why I created a foliage brush with it. And the trick here is I'm going to tap, 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 dark along the bottom edge, and then light, so like that gold yellow ochre along the top. We're trying to, again, create this effect that like the sunlight is glowing through this desert. And so the way to make that happen is by making whatever is closest to the sun, so like the tops of the landscape, whatever is closest to the sun, that's going to look more golden. And then whatever is further away from the sun, that's going to look more in shadow. And then I also took some gold ochre and tried to paint a little things of grass because it's, you know, watercolor. It's not opaque, so it's not going to show very much, but still worth a try. I also darkened up the back cacti a little bit because I thought that might look better. And all in all, I'm done. It was tricky. This one was tricky. The most important thing to remember as we're painting this desert landscape is we're not trying to capture all the details, but we are trying to capture the layers of light, right? So the layers of light that start with that white space in the sky, and then we continue that white space as we paint the mountain in the background so that the part of the mountain that's closest to the sun is lighter and more yellow, and then it gradually gets darker as it goes to the edge. And the same with the cacti. They are more orange or yellow, or even with the cactus with the sun shining through, right, where we lifted up the paint. It's lighter the closer we are to the sun, and then darker the closer we are to the edge. And then it's also darkest the closest we are to the foreground. So the cacti that are in the very, very foreground, that are taller and bigger than all of the other cacti, those are going to be the darkest. So we want the layers of light to make the light shine through. And then we also want to create depth here too. We're also making sure that the cacti are bigger in the front and then gradually get smaller and smaller and smaller toward the back. So if you're going to try for any specific detail like that, those are the ones that I would focus on if I were you. So what did I love and what did I learn? I love using the foliage brush. I loved that. I also loved the contrast, even though the cactus with the sun shining through was kind of tricky. Like if you have too much water, that paint is going to go everywhere, so you might have to mop it up. It was still really fun to just kind of like let myself be messy, and as long as I had a little bit of white space there, knowing that it was going to be okay. What did I learn? I think I wanted the cacti in the front to be a little skinnier. I also noticed that the colors bled a lot in the sky, so keep an eye on that in the future. I think that as I'm looking at this also, there are a lot of details I could be super nitpicky about, truly. And this is a tiny landscape. It's okay that we are implying detail. It's okay that nothing is perfect. There are a lot of blobs here, right? We're really just kind of focusing on the gradual shift in color, and it's okay. It looks great. And so I encourage you to talk kindly like that to yourself as well. Thank you so much for painting with me, and I'll see you again soon.